Hello and welcome to this tool time session. Our topic for consideration today is unconditional, my precious self or an other or a bit of my life acceptance. USA, UOA or ULA. As I go through this meeting, perhaps I'll cut myself some slack and breathe. So if I feel myself getting upset or disturbed in some way, I might breathe in through my nose for 4. Hold it for a second, breathe out through my mouth for 8. Hold it for a second. I might do that any time during the day that I'm starting to feel a little bit upset or disturbed, especially focusing on my diaphragmatic breathing, the way my belly moves in and out as I breathe. It has been said that focusing on diaphragmatic breathing, or the way my belly moves in and out when I breathe, reduces nervous tension by 40 to 60%. I commend that to you as potentially something helpful. Having said all that, discomfort might actually indicate that growth is occurring or is becoming a bit more possible, a bit more likely. Rats. So I might actually sit with my discomfort or my concern and see what's appearing. I commend that to you as perhaps an idea as well. As we go through this session, I might choose to do what I can with what I have at where I am. Do what I can with what I have at where I am. In this presentation, and as a result of it, I ain't got to do nothing. I'm not required to do anything. I might choose to, however. If I see something in this presentation that I think, oh no, I don't like the look of that, I'd never do that, I might put it aside and not look at it again, or maybe pick it up a little bit later when I feel it could be useful. If I see something in this meeting that I feel could be useful, I might pick it up and run with it. It's entirely up to me. I ain't got to do nothing. I might choose to, however. So I see something in this meeting that I think, I might actually run with that. I might decide to do it. It's entirely up to me. I ain't got to do nothing. I'm not required to do anything. I might choose to, however. A quote taken from someone will be changed to make it first person, less absolute and less telling. It is still attributed to the person. Where 2 question marks appear in the presentation, you might like to consider pausing the presentation and writing your answer in your journal or on a piece of paper, or just pondering for a moment in your own mind, whatever suits you as a person. Of course, you ain't got to do nothing. A fact, it provably is or did happen. A belief, I might form or alter it over time, or any time for that matter. It might be helpful, neutral, or unhelpful. Almost none are neutral. It tends to promote an action or inaction, which might be helpful, neutral, or unhelpful. A thought, it pops in and out of my head, helpful, neutral, or unhelpful. Almost none are neutral. There is a common human tendency for a thought of mine to be unhelpful. Rats, about a 3 or 4 to 1 ratio of unhelpful thought to helpful thought. Go figure. So there's a difference between a fact, a belief, and a thought. Rather than a belief of mine coming from a fact, as a common human, a belief of mine tends to come from a thought, either a thought of mine or a thought of another or a thought of a group, continuing to influence or control what I tend to do or not do, without being challenged for how helpful, neutral, or unhelpful it might be for me at this time. I might choose to accept myself, love myself, and mostly move forward. When I decide I'd rather fly, it might be a good idea to work out what belief or thing might be weighing me down a little. Thanks, Roy T. Managing a thought, a feeling, or a behaviour, multitasking has been scientifically shown to be a myth. I am attempting to put these links in the chat below. Unfortunately, at the moment, I can't appear to do that. So I'm still working on that. Managing a thought, a feeling, or a behaviour. I commend that to you when you're able to get access to it as something potentially helpful. I like to think of myself as a simple fact, like a planet or a star. It makes little sense to ask whether a star is good or bad, or whether it should be or should not be. It simply is. Likewise, I am, and I have one human's value. That's all I need. Thank you, Tantavi. Trust you're keeping well. A belief of self-esteem. Self-esteem might be toxic. How might I escape that trap? This is a presentation by Dr. Michael Edelstein. If you click on the link that could be appearing down below at some point, or copy this link somehow, you can download it as an MP3 for later listening. I commend it to you as something perhaps worth having a bit of a look at. A belief of self-compassion. Kristin Neff, Overcoming an Objection to Self-Compassion. YouTube in its infinite generosity will allow me to put a YouTube link in the chat below, so you can click on that particular link, I'm sure. I commend it to you as something that could be helpful. A belief of unconditional self-acceptance, USA. Self-compassion, like a feeling for someone I love dearly, who I accept as they are, warts and all. Look, I know they're flawed, but I just love them. Self-compassion and unconditional self-acceptance are other than self-pity, self-indulgent, passive or complacent, making an excuse. Oh, well, I'm only human. Believing that self-criticism is motivating, this tends to be fear-based. While humans are flawed, as a human, I am very capable of doing something extraordinary at some point, perhaps. Self-compassion and unconditional self-acceptance do seek to acknowledge that it is challenging for another person as well as me as a common human. Seek to provide the safety required to see myself more clearly with a bit less of my common human harsh judgment. Thanks, brain. Seek to have me prefer a bit more health and well-being for myself as a bit more of a priority when I'm able. Self-compassion and unconditional self-acceptance do seek to focus on self-acceptance rather than self-improvement. Seek to use a bit more discriminating wisdom rather than my common human harsh judgment. Thanks, brain, again. Seek to provide a personally, emotionally supportive environment for my alteration and growth. Acknowledge that when I accept myself a bit more as I am, then I might choose to helpfully alter a bit of my behaviour. Thank you, Carl Rogers. How might I move some way toward this? I look at it this way. A penny that is scratched, green with tarnish, or even chipped is still worth a penny. Thanks, rationality. The link below is for self-compassion. I commend it to you as something worth having a bit of a look at. The polar opposite of unconditional self-acceptance, USA, is the number one core unhelpful or irrational belief that as a common human, I would tend to have. Might you have part of the first major must that you can think of or that you have to hand that you might like to jot down? Please consider pausing the tape and perhaps doing that if you'd like to. Major must number one. I must be perfect in everything I do, be loved by everyone, important and significant to me at all times, and all other people for that matter. Win the approval of all others, or else I am no good, a failure, as well as unlovable. And not wishy-washy little things, little musts or perfects, but capital letters in bold with an exclamation mark to show that it is a must. I'm basically saying that I refuse to accept myself unless I satisfy these conditions of mine, and that I might tend to label myself an unlovable failure unless I constantly meet these impossible conditions, these demands of being perfect and being completely loved, maybe adored by all people at all times. When a core demand or condition that must be satisfied is not met, this forms a basis of my conditional self-rejection, sometimes thinly disguised. Why don't I stop this behaviour? I'm not good enough to do this. I'll never get this. Oh, this is what I deserve. Thanks, brain. Rather than looking for an absolute belief for this first major must, I am rather looking for the extent or the degree to which I tend to believe this thing or tend to act like I do. Perhaps when a stress is a bit more present, my orientation of mind. Emotional consequence of major must number 1, tendency toward anxiety or panic, tendency toward depression, tendency toward guilt, tendencies toward emotional roller coaster, tendency toward self-downing, tendency toward self-loathing. And probably rather than guilt, it's tendency towards shame. Behavioural consequence of major must number 1 is a tendency toward unhelpful addictive behaviour, rats. Tendency toward procrastination, tendency toward risk avoidance, tendency toward shyness, tendency toward unassertive behaviour, becoming a doormat for someone, tendency toward workaholic behaviour, tendency toward anger. The thing that is really challenging and really amazing is perhaps me giving up on the idea of me having to be perfect, beginning the work of me becoming a bit more of myself. Thanks, Anna. Looking first at a belief of self-esteem to see what it might be, later comparing it to a belief of unconditional self-acceptance, USA. What might a belief of self-esteem be? A belief of self-esteem is seen to be rating my precious self based on an act, trait, deed, or possession of mine. Since this is challenging to do over a lifetime, as a human, I may typically focus on a recent event, often the most recent event. I judge myself in the light of my current circumstance. Thanks, brain, a common human thing to do. In other words, this game of self-esteem is often rigged by me. I can tend to overdo it when I do well, aggrandize myself, to really down myself when I don't do well. A belief of self-esteem may result in a fluctuating sense of self-worth, my emotional roller coaster. Wow, brain, hang on. Even if I could accurately measure rather than unhelpfully interpret, thanks, brain, which tends to be a common human way, all my acts, traits, deeds, and possessions, all my wins and losses, all the people who have loved or liked me, all the people who have disliked or hated me, these thousands of elements over my lifetime, assigned them a value and came up with a final number. What purpose might that exercise possibly serve? I would also be required to rely on everyone else doing the exact same thing in the exact same way at the exact same time to get a scale I could place myself on for that fleeting moment in time. Piece of cake. In what way might the world of all people be bothered to help me out in this way? Why might I be bothered to do it then? A way to win the self-esteem game then is to be perfect 100% of the time and to have everyone love me. Piece of cake indeed. Or another way to win is not to play. I won't take part in society. I can't lose. I refuse to take part. I'll check out with my unhelpful addictive behaviour. So there, I'll do the opposite of the pack. That'll teach them. I'll become a rebel. In other words, the belief of self-esteem, rather than being an answer, might be a start of a much bigger problem. As a result, instead of helping me develop my self-efficacy, my belief in my ability to perhaps do, learn and grow, with a belief of self-esteem, I may instead develop my fear that I might somehow fail, because when I fail, it's back to poo-hood for me, which can't be a nice neighbourhood. My worth might head straight for the dumpster. I must do exceptionally well or I am a failure. I may engage in self-pity when my humanness or an external condition prevents me from reaching the perfection I demand. A belief of unconditional self-acceptance might be radically different from what I hear every day in my culture. Therefore, it may be challenging for me to internalise. Recognition might be a step in my awakening. Thanks, Two Putts. Realisation might be a step in my growth. Thanks, mate. Awareness might be a step in my change. Wow. Thanks, Two Putts. You are greatly missed. A belief of unconditional self-acceptance, USA, means I am me and I am me, period. A belief of unconditional self-acceptance suggests that rather than being required to have to do well, rather than being required to have to be loved by another, I might simply choose to accept my innate worth. A belief of unconditional self-acceptance attempts to separate my innate worth from any helpful or unhelpful behaviour, event, or income of mine. I have one human being's worth of value, whatever that is, a constant, nothing more and certainly nothing less. One human being's worth of value, a constant. A belief of unconditional self-acceptance suggests that it is probably reasonable or helpful or rational to believe that I might simply choose to accept myself, regardless of a helpful action or trait of mine or unhelpful action or trait of mine. Where is the law written in stone that says I must reject myself as a person based on an arbitrary criteria or outcome? How helpful might it be for me to believe I am required to judge my precious self as a result of a previous or current choice or experience? What about an unhelpful behaviour or trait I may exhibit? Instead of rating my precious self based on a behaviour of mine, I might instead choose to believe it is perhaps a bit more helpful to choose to rate the behaviour itself as helpful or unhelpful. Choose to decide how much this behaviour was or is worth to me as a person. In a belief of unconditional self-acceptance, I might choose to move past an unhelpful choice and outcome as I begin to choose to see it as an event, distinct from my precious self. A success, a win doesn't make me. A failure, a loss doesn't break me. Thanks, Zig Ziglar. Rest in peace. There may be someone I meet who doesn't choose to see my innate worth. Why would I choose that be me as well? Thanks, Mel Robbins. Mel Robbins puts out some pretty helpful stuff. I commend that to you as someone maybe to have a bit of a look at. In fact, one challenge for me might be to refuse to attach a label to my precious self. A label might describe a single behaviour or event or series of events rather than me as a whole person. I might choose to catch myself in the act of labelling myself or another and perhaps choose to let it go just a tiny little bit. A belief of unconditional self-acceptance suggests that I can neither increase nor diminish my worth. My worth is a constant. The only thing that might change, that I might choose to evaluate, is the value of a behaviour of mine to me or another. I might choose to work towards a belief that I have one human being's worth of value, whether I do a great thing or a not so great thing. Whatever that human being worth is, it is unmeasurable, unfathomable, and it remains a constant. Refusing to put a value or limit on it acknowledges that who knows what I might manage to learn or learn to do? Who knows what I might manage to learn or learn to do? Who might I be required to accept as my sometimes, or not, if not often, self-appointed judge and or jury of my total precious self? Who might I choose to give the power to decide my total worth, even my partial worth? Anyone? Why even me then? If someone comes up to me and attempts to condemn me, I might choose to make it about my behaviour. Oh yes, that behaviour of mine wasn't helpful. I'm really sorry I behaved that way. How might I make it up to you? I would certainly rather I hadn't behaved that way. I find it disappointing. My behaviour really sucked. I unreservedly apologise. How might I make it up to you? If a person persists with attempting to put me down or attempts to make me suffer for a past unhelpful behaviour, I might choose to distance myself from them. I'm truly sorry I behaved that way, and I'm truly sorry you are still suffering as a result. However, our being together is unhelpful for both of us, and I will limit our time together for that reason. I'm really sorry. See you later, mashed potato. My own unhelpful self-talk. How is me choosing to say this unhelpful, unkind, and unhelpfully inaccurate thing about my precious self helpful to me as a person? brain. Well, that thing I did definitely wasn't as helpful as I'd like, brain. I wonder how I might do a little better, a bit more often, brain, if you don't mind switching on to something a bit helpful. Don't knock yourself out. My own self-acceptance might start with realizing I might have an ability to choose to unconditionally accept myself. 2, agreeing that I might choose to interrupt my unhelpful and very human habit of conditional self-rejection. To what extent might I be arguing with myself now about being a little more self-accepting, about me moving a bit toward USA? Hey, brain? I might choose to catch what self-talk is going on, maybe choosing to replace it with a little more care, kindness, and understanding. There's an idea, brain. It might help to write down an unhelpful self-talk, then read it out aloud, not on public transport or in a police station. I will probably get arrested. Then perhaps choose to dispute it. Yeah? Says who? Dispute or question. Thanks, Zircon. Fail. Further attempt in learning. While I am choosing to cut myself a break, perhaps I might choose to be generous to an other as well. UOA, unconditional other acceptance. The polar opposite of unconditional other acceptance, UOA, might be the number one core unhelpful or irrational belief. Might you have a part of the second major must, or might you start to guess what it might look like? Please consider pausing the presentation and maybe having a guess. Major must number 2, an other person must behave as I think they should, do the right thing and treat me with respect and consideration at all times, or else they are a no good, worthless, damnable person who deserves to be punished. They deserve the roast in hell. And I'm going to be their chief roaster as soon as I get there. And with this sort of attitude, it won't be long. This core demand forms the basis of conditional other rejection. Emotional consequence of major must number 2, tendency toward anger, rage or fury, tendency toward bitterness, tendency toward impatience, tendency toward resentment. Behavioural consequence of major must number 2, tendency toward unhelpful addictive behaviour, rats. Tendency toward aggression and violence, tendency toward bigotry and intolerance, tendency toward bullying, tendency toward nagging, tendency toward anger outburst. Happy camper. The issue occurs when I escalate a preference and make it more of a must. It might be a common human thing to do that, to take a preference, I'd prefer if that was the case, and make it a must. That must be the case. Sometimes thinly disguised. Why doesn't this person understand what I'm going through? Why doesn't this person support me in what I'm doing? Why can't this person see I'm changing? Why does this person keep bringing up my past? Why is this person doing this to me? Perhaps I might choose to dispute, question, interview. ABC Disputation tool. The link will eventually, hopefully, be in the comments section below. When I have some acceptance of a person as they behave now, I might become more effective in helping them do better than they do now when they choose to put in some effort. Thanks, John W. The devaluation of a person or object is a prerequisite in anger. When I label someone, I cease to see the person. From that point forward, I only see the label. The devaluation of a person or object is a prerequisite in anger. This rejection of another might lead me towards rating this person as having lower worth as a person, being subhuman because they didn't meet my condition. I might tend to devalue them as a person. When I work to limit that second major must in me, I might keep more flexibility in dealing with an other person. Once I label them bad or worthless, I then might be much less likely to see a better way to helpfully interact with them. I might choose to instead see their behaviour as helpful or unhelpful if I choose to even do that. Unconditional other acceptance, UOA, says that an other person isn't required to have to do well to be accepted as a human being by me. Rather than rate an other person and typically label them, I might instead look to rate their belief, thought, and behaviour as helpful or unhelpful to me or them or us when I choose to. Or I may simply accept their belief or action as well as accept them as a person. While accepting that I cannot easily, if at all, influence their behaviour or action, I might unconditionally accept an other person as a person, a fallible human, no matter how unhelpfully they act. I might still choose to distance myself from them and their behaviour for a time or for good, for my own well-being or peace of mind. If they behaved in a particularly antisocial way, they may even need to go into some sort of jail. I might choose to not be a doormat for another. A choice that suits me might still be available to me. I might still choose to ask to be treated with respect and consideration. I might still choose to ask to be treated with respect and consideration. This isn't the same as I have a right to be treated with respect and consideration. I have a right to choose to ask because I give myself that right. Acceptance is other than approval. Hey, that behaviour of yours I find unhelpful. I quite like you as a person, and I would rather that we still got on. However, what you just did, I really didn't like it. I might choose to cut myself a break. I might choose to cut another a break, see the person I am, the person they are, while I acknowledge and deal with the behaviour of theirs or mine if I choose to. Making a demand that can't be met tends to lead to anxiety or depression or acting out addictively. Rats. When I accept that it is not possible to control the behaviour of another, rather simply seek to influence it, sometimes I may tend to unnecessarily upset myself a whole lot less. By despising another, I might tend to consume myself with rage. Holding a grudge might be like drinking a poison and waiting for the other person to die. No amount of damnation that I choose to carry around will probably change the unhelpful behaviour of this person. They will remain a fallible human, capable of a wonderfully constructive act and an act of mindless stupidity. Nor will it change their action of the past. Thanks, Albert Ellis. Abandon all hope of a better past. Abandon all hope of a better past. That means no amount of thinking about the past will actually go back and change a single tiny bit of it. UOA, unconditional other acceptance, might be unconditional self-acceptance turned outward. Maybe choose to start with me with my unconditional self-acceptance and turn it outward, or choose to begin with my unconditional other acceptance and maybe turn it a bit inward. Maybe choose to work on both of them together. Nobody's saying that this is easy. If they're saying that it's easy, they've obviously never done it. A thing that I might like to entertain is that perhaps there's a little bit possible than I'm currently thinking at the moment. Thanks, brain. Hurt people, hurt people. Rather than an attack on me, it might be just stuff. What might this thing say about how this other person is traveling as a person? How do I think they're going at the moment? Someone's behaviour tends to not be directed personally at me. It is perhaps a bit of lashing out in pain and discomfort. USA, unconditional self-acceptance. I might choose to develop more of the ability to accept myself, see more of my worth as a constant, unable to be quantified or altered. My behaviour may at some time not be as helpful. However, that does not make me worth any less as a human being. The polar opposite of unconditional life acceptance, ULA, is the number one, easy for me to say, the number 3 core unhelpful or irrational belief. Might you have a little of the third major must to do with life, or beginning to suspect what it might be? please consider jotting it down, pausing the tape. Major must number 3. Life, the world, must give me what I want. Nothing I don't want. Go the way I want it to at all times. Be easily enjoyable and hassle-free, or my life is terrible and worthless, and I can't stand it. Nicknamed Disneyland without having to line up for rides, the basis of conditional life rejection. Emotional consequence of major must number 3, lowered frustration tolerance, lowered discomfort tolerance, lowered uncertainty tolerance, tendency towards self-pity, tendency toward depression. Behavioural consequence of major must number 3, tendency toward unhelpful addictive behaviour, rats. Tendency toward procrastination, tendency toward shirking duty, tendency toward anger. The 3 major must link will very possibly be in the description box below. It maybe took time and unnoticed training by another and a decision or two by my dear self to place some of these unhelpful beliefs or conditions on myself or another or my life. It may take time and a choice of intentional self-training to perhaps choose to love and accept my precious self or another or my life a bit more unconditionally. To choose to perhaps let go a little of an unhelpful belief or thought as I am a bit more able. I had a t-shirt that said, I am the center of the universe. I met a person who had one that said, he is wearing my t-shirt. Thanks, 2 putts. There may be an important difference between what I must have and what I might prefer. Recognition might be the first step in my change, discovering the power of my choice. Buy a Kalashnikov, educate a child. A person sent $1 to Africa. That dollar was used to buy a Kalashnikov rifle. That rifle was used to murder a village elder and terrorize an entire village. That exact same dollar was given by the arms dealer to a prestigious school to educate their child. That child grew to be a doctor and soothe and save the people of their country. They renounced the deeds of their parent. They did wonderful, selfless deeds in their own right. The school took that dollar to the bank and the teller put it with all the other dollars. No one could see any difference in that dollar at all. Whilst that dollar had been used to do a very unhelpful thing, used to do a wonderfully helpful thing, it was still a dollar. It still had the exact same value. Money is an invention. It only has a value because people suggest and accept it has a value. Whether I've done a really unhelpful thing or a tremendously helpful thing, I still might choose to acknowledge and accept I have a constant value, one person's worth, whatever that is. Unlike a dollar that requires a country and a world to put a value on it, I might even choose to put aside the notion of my value. I might choose to alter the way I interact in the world and increase the likelihood of a helpful act of mine. I might choose to say a slightly more helpful thing anytime. I might choose to put a value on an act of mine if I want to, for its helpfulness, helpful or unhelpful, and to what degree. I might choose to do an act more often that increases the likelihood of a more helpful outcome for me. I might choose to alter in what way the dollar of me is spent. Thoughts. How might this dollar talk make sense? That could be a joke, but who knows? 3-minute therapy, chapter 3, self-esteem, Dr. Michael Edelstein. Jerry's 3-minute exercise is potentially helpful in unconditional self-acceptance. The entire chapter is potentially very helpful. Chapter 3. I commend it to you. Dr. Edelstein published his entire book on his website. His publishers quite rightly caused him to take them all down, and he settled on just publishing 3, I believe, chapters. They're certainly worth a read. I commend them to you as potentially something helpful. I now see how owning my own story and loving myself through that process is the bravest thing I will ever do. Thanks, Brene. I forgave myself. The supreme act of forgiveness was when I forgave myself for all the wounds I created in my own life. Forgiveness is an act of self-love. When I forgave myself, self-acceptance began and self-love grew. Thanks, Miguel. I myself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, might benefit from a little of my love and affection. Wow, thanks, Sharon. When I loved myself a little more, I began leaving whatever wasn't healthy. This meant a person, a job, a belief of mine, or a habit of mine. Anything that kept me small. My judgment called it disloyal. I now see it as self-loving. Thanks, Kim. How I love myself is how I might teach another to love me. Thanks, Rupi. No amount of my self-improvement can make up for a lack of my own self-acceptance. Wow. Thanks, Robert. Self-acceptance is my refusal to be in an adversarial relationship with myself. Thanks, Nathaniel. When I love myself first, everything else falls into line. I am better to love myself first to get anything else done in this world. Thanks, Lucille. I might succeed when nobody else believes in me, and I might not succeed when I don't believe in my ability to choose what is more helpful. Wow, thanks, William. Once I believe in my ability to try, I might risk curiosity, wonder, spontaneous delight, or an experience that reveals my human spirit. Thanks, EE. I lock eyes with my reflection and keep looking. The day I choose to look away, I might start to lose myself. I'm going to choose to keep myself. I am what I am. I accept it. Thanks, Karen. I trust you're still growing a little bit as much as you'd like. What do I feel might be more helpful for me to do is all that concerns me rather than what other people may think. Wow. Thanks, Ralph. What do I feel might be more helpful for me to do? Congratulations on using your power of choice and taking action to be here. I commend and acknowledge you and congratulate you for your power of choice. It doesn't look all that powerless to me. These are the resources that we use to create this meeting. The link should be in the comments section below. If someone tells me what is in this presentation is easy, it means they have obviously never tried to do it. A thing that I might like to entertain or consider, thanks brain, is that a thing in here is perhaps a little more possible than my wonderful darling brain is telling me at this moment. Whatever I can manage to do at this particular time is wonderfully okay. I am at the coalface. I am doing the work. I got a bit, maybe I'll give a bit. A light came on for me a bit, perhaps I'll pay some of the light bill. Please consider donating to whoever or whatever helps you a little. I'd like you to consider donating to the Greater Good in Action website, greatergood.berkeley.edu, donate. All the best. I'm really sorry that I maybe won't meet you. I trust this has been that's easy for me to say. I trust this has been a benefit to you and that you have found something in here that could potentially be a little bit helpful in your life. Best regards.